Have you ever come across a person who fears intimacy, who fears trust, who fears communication, and who fears commitment? Whenever they're in a relationship with someone, they tend to hold themselves back. They wear a mask on their face, so they're never able to openly communicate and express themselves to their partner. And when they realize that their partner is tending to become very serious and the relationship now is becoming a commitment, they sort of leave the relationship and jump to another relationship. This is one example of an effect of a wounded inner child. Inner child wounds, or a wounded inner child, is where an individual has gone through psychological, mental, or emotional abuse or an injury from their childhood. And this is because their caregivers or their parents or their guardians were not able to meet their needs as a child. There are 4 types of wounded inner child. One is called abandonment wound. Abandonment wound is where an individual fears of being alone or being left out, and therefore they develop more of codependency tendencies. For instance, in terms of their relationships, they're more clingy towards their partners. In friendship circles, they're the friend that are always clingy to you. Whether you need space or not, they're always clingy onto you. Another type of inner child wound is trust wound. This is where a person is unable to trust others around them or even trust themselves. So they have a very low sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And this affects how they view themselves as an individual in terms of their relationships with others. We have guilt wound. So a guilt wound is where a person is often guilty or they often blame themselves for events that have happened in their life. So they use guilt as a way to manipulate others. Another also habit that people who have guilt wound have is that they don't have the ability to express what they want. They assume others are able to read them and they're able to respond to them without even asking. The 4th type, on the last type of inner child wound, is called neglect wound. A neglect wound is where an individual is always angry towards themselves and they're always angry towards others for being in a certain situation. And because people are angry and they try and avoid saying no to them, therefore they are known as people who please others, people pleasers, and they're unable to refuse other people. One of the signs of a wounded inner child is that you're afraid of being alone. You fear being alone. You fear that you'll be abandoned. And therefore, you tend to be insecure about yourself, about your capabilities. Your confidence level is very low. An example of this is seen in a relationship, right? Where an individual whose partner maybe has gone abroad for a work trip, they tend to be worried about what their partner is doing. They constantly are clingy, texting, calling, where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? And this sort of develops anxious feelings for that person. Another sign is that a person is ashamed of expressing themselves. They believe that they're inadequate or they're unworthy of feeling an emotion and expressing their emotions. An example of this is a person graduates from high school, from university, wherever they've graduated from. It's a happy feeling. It's a feeling where they should be proud of themselves, but they suppress their emotion and they show you that they're feeling, oh well, it's just a graduation. Not really letting themselves feel that pride, feel that happiness, and feel that joy. Another form or a sign of a wounded inner child is where a person distrusts themselves and also is unable to trust others around them. An example of this is where a person is constantly doubting their confidence. So they are filled with self-doubt. At work, and the boss gives them positive criticism. And throughout that criticism, they feel as though they have done something wrong. They are not capable. They are not educated enough to take that criticism and do that task properly. The last sign of a wounded inner child is where the person is a people's pleaser, and they develop this tendency because they want to avoid conflict. With this sort of sign, you'd see where you are unable to say no to people. And that is because you do not want another person to have a negative perception about you. An example of this is at work, your boss asks you to work overtime. Knowing you're a mother, you still have to get back home and cook dinner for your children. You are still unable to say no to your boss, and you work overtime, and dinner for your children is also affected. So your responsibilities as a mother and as an employee are conflicting. Every event that happens in our life, we create a perception towards that event. So every event you go through as a child, whether it's a happy event or a negative event, something that made you feel bad, sad about yourself or the world, you create a perception about you as an individual in the world and the world around you. And therefore, any event that happens in your childhood will ultimately affect you as an adult on how you view yourself in terms of your self-identity, your self-worth, and your self-esteem, as well as how you view others towards you. And it will also direct how you react to others around you. Therefore, wounded inner childs can always link to various mental disorders, such as depression. If you have gone through a traumatic experience as a child, if you viewed or witnessed violence between your parents or your caregivers as a child, if you were a refugee and you would see war happen in front of you as a child, it would ultimately affect how you view yourself and your sense of self-worth as an adult. And therefore, there's that link between depression, anxiety, especially post-traumatic stress disorder, and wounded inner child. There are various ways that you can try to heal from inner childhood, but it should first start by identifying if your inner child is wounded. And once you say yes or no, then you need to try and figure out or identify what wound do you have. Do you have an abandonment wound? Do you have guilt wound? Do you have trust wound? Or do you have neglect wound? Or you could have more than one of these wounds. Thereafter, it's then important to allow yourself to bring back the joys that you missed in your childhood. What I mean is you need to make time for yourself to have fun. You need to make time for yourself where you are taking care of yourself, where you are finding ways to improve your self-esteem, to make sense that you are important and others can also view you as important. It's also important for you to use journaling as a method to heal from your wounded inner child. Journaling can be done in different forms and methods, but first start by writing a letter to yourself, expressing to yourself how you feel about your childhood, how you feel the effects of unhealthy or unhelpful events in your childhood have influenced you as a youth or an adult, and then write how you feel about it and now what you want to achieve after acknowledging what you feel about your wounded inner child. Another way to supplement journaling is meditation and mindfulness. Use your 5 senses to bring you back into reality. Try and identify what is the one thing I can taste, what is the one thing I can smell, what can I see, what can I hear, what can I feel. All these bring you back to reality and give you a sense that you are also an individual. It is also important for you to take care of yourself. Lastly, in order for you to identify your type of wounded inner child, to identify how your wounds in your childhood has affected your youth and your adulthood, you can always talk to a professional. Talk to a therapist. You can walk into Hisia Psychology Consultants and you will have a therapist there happy to walk the journey with you in order to identify your wounds from your childhood and how you can heal from them for you to be a positive youth and adult.